Research is normally guided by what we call it by research objectives. So a clear understanding of what research objectives is also an important thing that students and researchers alike need to know. That is why our present discussion, we want now look at research objectives. We want to look at a couple of issues within this, including what is meant by research objectives, the types of research objectives, the importance of having research objectives in the study, and also the criteria that researchers could use to determine whether or not the kind of research objectives they are put forward are good for the kind of study that they wish to undertake. So this is equally an important area that requires our full attention. Remember that it is quite difficult for any research to be undertaken, and indeed for any human activity to be undertaken without first laying down the objectives. So objectives are quite important. Let us now look at what they mean, the types, why they're important, and what makes research objectives good. That is, the indicators of good research objectives. Welcome to the discussion. Let us begin by understanding what is meant by research objectives. And research objectives refer to the definitive statements which provide a clear and concise description of what the researcher seeks to achieve by conducting the research. The objectives are normally formulated at the beginning of the study, and they describe in a concise manner what the research is trying to achieve, in addition to providing the direction that the study will take. Objectives generally are understood as breakdowns or the smaller specific issues that a researcher seeks to pursue in order to answer the broader research problem. And these objectives should be quite clear, should be quite simple, and also focused. As we are going to see later on, objectives normally should have certain characteristics which generally we call SMART. That is, they need to be specific, they need to be measurable, they need to be achievable, but also importantly, they need to be time-bound. And objectives can generally be classified into two broader areas. We have what we call specific objectives, where the general objectives are the main or the broader goals that the study seeks to address. And then now we have what we call specific objectives. So objectives are either general or specific. Specific are a little bit finer, while general is basically formulated from or reflects the broader research problem that the study seeks to address. So when we talk about objectives, we can also look at them as the specific steps, activities that a researcher will undertake in order to answer the research problem. That is, they're the means. Research problem is the destination. So objectives are the means that the researcher will employ in order to arrive at the destination. And they must meet certain criteria that I said we are going to look at in a while. Again, objectives can be broken into two broader types. We have general objectives and then the specific objectives. I stated earlier that it is always important for studies to have objectives. And I also alluded to the fact that it might be very difficult, if not impossible, to undertake a study without objectives. Perhaps it is time now for me to justify why objectives are important in any kind of study that needs to be undertaken. One of the most important reasons why studies should have objectives is because an objective provides the study the scope. That is, the objectives establish the scope and the depth of the study. And this one helps researchers to avoid collection of data or information, which later on, at a later stage, might turn out to be unnecessary. So the scope of the study is clearly explained by the variables in the study, which are largely the issues the researchers want to evaluate the study. The variables narrow down the research to several manageable components, which enable the researcher to discern or understand the differences or association or correlations between different variables. The research, therefore, the research objectives therefore offer the parameters within which the results of the study can be interpreted and evaluated. Because, like I stated earlier, objectives are the means that a researcher pursues in order to find answers to the research problem. Therefore, by having them, it in a way directs the researcher in terms of the depth and the width of the study, so that a researcher does not collect anything and everything that he or she comes across, because doing so might mean that the research problem might not be definitely given answers to through the research. So scope in a study is also important because it limits how much a researcher can collect, or how wide the area is, as well as how much resources a researcher could deploy in their effort to collect the most important evidence that enables them to draw important conclusions about the study. Research objectives are also important when it comes to the kind of data that is being collected, because they offer the guidance on the type of data that should be gathered, as well as the kind of procedures that need to be employed when collecting data. In some cases, again, objectives might also give a guideline in terms of how data will be measured, and also the kind of statistical texts and tools that can be used to analyze the data. For instance, research objectives point to whether the study is qualitative or quantitative, or it is mixed. That is, whether it has certain aspects that are qualitative and others that are quantitative. Given the fact that research can be qualitative and quantitative, and given again further that objectives play a major role in terms of delineating whether the study would be qualitative or quantitative, again, that delineation helps so much in terms of the kind of research instruments that are used, so that some instruments can better work in qualitative studies, while others, such as questionnaires, are well suited for quantitative studies. If a wrong instrument is used for the wrong type of research, the danger is that the kind of data that is gathered might have a lot of issues with regard to their accuracy. It is on that basis that it is important that studies have objectives, because objectives can clearly indicate the kind of study or the kind of study approach that will be used, whether it is qualitative or quantitative, or whether it is both. That is, some aspects are qualitative while others are quantitative. And on that basis, again, the type of research approach that's employed will also determine the kind of research instruments that are used. And if proper research instruments are employed, then the kind of the level of accuracy of data that's collected becomes high. That is, if you use research instruments that have been tested and found as being suitable for qualitative studies, such as interviews, focus group discussions, observation, among others, then that one will enhance the kind of accuracy, the data accuracy. So it is important that objectives are available in any study, because such objectives will provide a hint as to the kind of study that is being undertaken, and an understanding of what kind of study that is being undertaken can also provide a sufficient guideline in terms of the kind of instruments that are better placed to provide data that is not only sufficient but also accurate. Research objectives are also quite important when it comes to the identification of the research methodology. A researcher is able to gauge the appropriate research methodology to employ based on the research objectives. Objectives, as we know, is basically a summary of the approach and purpose of the research, and this one which helps in focusing the study. But also research objectives also facilitates the development of research methodology if they are properly formulated. Like I indicated earlier on, the kind of research design that's employed is determined by the kind of research objectives. The kind of data collection methods that's employed, again, will also be determined by the type of research objectives formulated. Further, the methods that are used to analyze and the parameters that are used to interpret collected data is also determined by the research objectives. So a whole range of methodological issues are better understood by looking at the kind of research objectives that are available. Research objectives that point to a qualitative study would warrant qualitative instruments of data collection, while one that points largely to a quantitative study will also warrant the use of quantitative methods of data collection, such as questionnaires. Again, how the kind of research design that we employ will also depend on the kind of objectives that are available in the study. Again, qualitative studies, which again are largely defined by the kind of objectives, have specific research designs that go with them. And the same is true for quantitative studies. That's why research objectives become important, because they can be used to gauge in advance the kind of methods to employ and the kind of theories to be used, as well as the kind of research designs that the study can be anchored on. Let's also look at the types of research objectives. Research objectives might also go with the type of actual research. And on that basis, some of the types of research objectives, they go alongside the types of research that we had stated earlier. One of the types of research objectives is called exploratory objectives. And exploratory objectives are those that are designed to explore a topic an issue or phenomena that has been that not so much is known about. And the aim of this kind of objective is to gain a better understanding of the subject matter and then generate some ideas and hypotheses. So the type of objective that can be used to measure multiple outcomes as well as establish patterns in the data or relationship that can be used to generate hypotheses. If that is the aim of any research, if a researcher wishes to understand or to generate multiple outcomes in any given study, then that kind of study should adopt exploratory research objectives. And sometimes, again, if a study wishes just to be understood as a kind of pilot study, so that the initial finding of that study can then be used to conceptualize and mount a larger study, then that kind of study can also be anchored on exploratory objectives. Like I noted earlier, if you engage in an exploratory research, then the best way is also to use exploratory objectives. The other type of objective is called explanatory objectives. And these are types of objectives that seek to explain the cause and effect relationships between different phenomena. The objectives help researchers to understand a particular problem in depth by providing more information about a given topic or a given issue. The data that is generated by explanatory objectives can be used to predict the cause of a given phenomenon or draw hypotheses behind a given phenomenon and even predict future occurrences. This type of research objectives is appropriate in studies where very little information is available. So when we intend to undertake studies on an emerging issue, an issue that has not been researched more or very little information is available about it, then the best type of objectives to generate to drive that kind of study as explanatory objectives. This is because, one, they seek to understand the relationship between different variables. For instance, what is the relationship between school dropout and unplanned pregnancy, or school dropout and involvement in criminal activities? So such kind of things can only be understood well if we adopt explanatory objectives, because what causes a phenomenon can easily be understood when such studies are anchored on exploratory objectives. They are preferred because they enable researchers to generate in-depth information in a variety of data, which enables researchers now to understand a given issue from a fairly in-depth point of view. The other type of objective is called descriptive objectives, and these are objectives that aim to describe the characteristics, the features or attributes of a particular population, a group, or phenomena. And their aim is to accurately and systematically describe a population, a situation, or a phenomena. And such objectives can be used to answer the what, the where, the when, and how questions, but not why question. That is, we use such studies when our main interest is to provide a definitive description of an issue as it is, without necessarily going behind the scene to study more in depth to understand why does a situation arise. We simply want to describe the situation as it is without going deeper to understand why it arises, because descriptive studies basically wants to state things as they are without necessarily going deeper to understand the causes of their occurrences. And they can be designed to use a variety of research methods to investigate one or more variables. So they remain also a very, very important objective, rather type of objective that, if properly employed, can provide some great insight into why an issue exists. It is highly important to note that at advanced study level, especially master's and PhD, the use of descriptive objectives is highly discouraged because of the fact that at that level, scholars or researchers are required to be fairly in-depth to answer the why question more than the when, the where, and the how. The interest more is on the why question. Why do things exist the way they do? That becomes the major preoccupation and objective of advanced studies. That is why at master's and PhD level, the descriptive studies, rather objectives, may not be highly preferred because of the fact that they do not help to the generation of data that helps in answering the why question. Having looked at the meaning of research, the purpose of research or the importance of research objectives and the various types of research objectives, I now want us to turn our attention to the qualities or characteristics of good research objectives. One of the major characteristics is that a good research objective should be specific. Specificity here means clarity. It must be clear. It must point to an issue that can easily be identified. And a clearly stated and well-defined objective is one that focuses on a single outcome. It should be noted that one single research cannot be a solution to all research issues. So the focus has to be clear so that the issues that will enable a researcher to gain insight into the formulated or conceptualized research problem can only be possible if the objectives that have been used to pursue that is clear and focused. So specificity is important because when the research objectives are specific, when they are focused, again, it helps in the generation of clear data, clear and relevant data that can be used to answer the research questions. So specificity is an important feature of good research objectives. The other important characteristic of research objective is the measurability. When we talk of a measure, it's a number, a percentage, or a standard unit that is used as a reference point from which change can be monitored. So objectives should be measurable so that a researcher is able to demonstrate that it has been achieved. Otherwise, if we are not able to measure our objectives, then it becomes quite difficult at the end of the day for a researcher to gauge whether or not the research objective has been achieved. It's therefore important for researchers to clearly show how they intend to measure key variables and outcomes of their study. For instance, how would we measure performance, say, in an organization like a bank? We might want to look at that maybe by the number of customers it has acquired over a given financial period, We might look at that maybe by the amount of profit it has gained, the number of sales it has made, and so forth and so on. That is about measuring performance in a profit-making institution such as a bank. So every study must have clear ways on how it is going to measure the outcome of its study. And that's why measurement becomes an important instrument or characteristic upon which the quality of a good research objective is gauged. The other characteristic of a good research objective is that it should be achievable. That is, objectives should be within the means of intellectual capacity of the researcher, the resources available, and time available for the research. Otherwise, we cannot set out to undertake a study and then come up with objectives that are beyond the capacity of the researcher. We must understand our ability as intellectuals, our ability in terms of resources that we have, and also the time that's available for a given study to be undertaken. Some studies might require to be carried out by highly experienced researchers and scholars. Others might or can easily be examined by beginning researchers. Again, some studies require enormous amount of resources in terms of money, transportation, accommodation, among others, while others might require little resources. Again, some studies may require to be done for several years, again, depending on the type of study it is, while others can easily be studied in a matter of months. So we have to carefully understand the kind of objectives that we have, and we must make sure that the objectives that we have are achievable. We have the means in terms of intellectual capacity, in terms of resources, and in terms of time available for those objectives to be fulfilled. So we need to properly ensure that the resources that we have, the time that we have, and the level of skills that's available within the research team is one that is commensurate with the kind of objectives that are there. So we must, and at all times, ensure that the objectives are achievable in terms of resources, intellectual capacity, and time. Otherwise, it becomes pointless for researchers to embark on a journey in which they know for sure at the beginning of that journey that they will not reach the destination. The destination has to be reached. Otherwise, if it's not possible, then it is better to have a research that is scaled down that fits within the intellectual, financial, and time capacity of the researcher. Research objectives should also be relevant, and this is also another important characteristic of quality objectives. That is, we need to align our research problem to ensure that the time and resources that have been used in carrying out that study is worth it. Relevance here means two ways. One, it should be relevant to the field of study of the researcher, or it should be relevant in terms of addressing human problems that exist in society. So relevance is key. No person would want to spend time and resources in a research that has no benefit, either in terms of enhancing knowledge or in terms of addressing problems or simply in terms of providing solutions or informing the kind of decisions that society needs to make from time to time. So relevance becomes a key. If, for example, one is doing an academic study, then the relevance here would mean a study that fits within one field of study. If you are doing sociology, community development, psychology, criminology, economics, geography, and so on and so forth. The understanding is that the kind of objectives that are generated are relevant to that field of study, but also relevant to the research problem that had been formulated. So that we don't have a research problem that, for instance, talks about relapse among drug addicts, and then the objectives is talking about the causes of drug addiction. No, that's not relevant. If the problem is formulated around relapse, then the objectives must also speak to relapse. If the problem is formulated around, say, an issue such as early pregnancy, then the research objectives must equally speak to early pregnancy. If, say, it is divorce, the same thing should go hand in hand. So relevance here are at two things, at two levels. One, relevance to one field of study, and also relevant to the research problem that has been conceptualized and whose answers is considered important for the intellectuals, for government, for community, and other stakeholders. That comes at that point. Now we come to the end of this discussion on objectives. Thank you.